The war had ended, but hunger remained. German cities lay in rubble, their streets crowded with women in patched coats, children with hollow eyes, and old men pushing carts filled with scavenged wood. Food was scarce, soap was scarce, but one item, above all, seemed to carry more power than any currency: cigarettes. By 1945, tobacco in Germany had become as valuable as gold. A single cigarette could be traded for bread, butter, or even a night of shelter. Packs could buy a dress, a pair of shoes, or a doctor's visit. For many, survival depended not on money, which had collapsed with the Reich, but on smoke curling from a paper tube. And then the Americans arrived. The first shock. It happened in Frankfurt, Munich, Hamburg, every city where US troops established barracks. German women waiting near fences saw soldiers pull packs from their pockets: Lucky Strikes, Camels, Chesterfields, brands they had only heard whispered about. The soldiers lit them casually, exhaling thick clouds into the broken air of cities that still smelled of dust and fire. And then, sometimes, without finishing, they flicked the glowing stubs to the ground. The sight froze women in their tracks. Children darted forward, snatching the butts, clutching them as treasures. Women bent down quickly, hiding the scraps in their fists, tucking them into pockets to be unravelled later, every shred of tobacco saved. For the Americans, it was nothing. For Germans, it was survival. Cigarettes as currency. To understand the shock, one must understand what cigarettes had become by 1945. During the last years of war, tobacco imports had collapsed. Ersatz mixtures filled the gap. Dried leaves, shredded herbs, even sawdust pressed into paper. Soldiers grumbled. Civilians smoked twigs. Real tobacco became rarer than coffee, rarer than chocolate. By 1944, a single cigarette fetched outrageous prices on the black market. One American Red Cross report noted that in Berlin, a carton could trade for a full month's ration of bread. German money, inflated and distrusted, meant nothing. Cigarettes became the true currency. Women traded them for shoes. Men traded them for work favors. Families hoarded them, not for smoking, but for survival. So when German women saw Americans smoking one after another, tossing half-finished cigarettes into the gutter, the sight was almost unbearable. They burned wealth like paper. One witness, a young woman from Stuttgart named Ilse, later wrote in a diary, "The first time I saw an American soldier drop a half-smoked cigarette, I thought I was dreaming. My brother had once traded a violin for 10 cigarettes, and here they fell from his hand like trash. I picked it up from the ground, still warm, and cried as I smoked it." Others described the shame and desperation of scavenging discarded stubs. Mothers sent children to wait outside barracks to collect butts. Little girls gathered them in tins, carefully unravelling the paper at home to make new cigarettes rolled from the remnants. To Americans, it was invisible. To Germans, it was like watching strangers throw gold coins into the mud. The American gesture. Not all soldiers ignored the stares. Some noticed the women lingering, their eyes fixed on the cigarettes. Many GIs began handing them out deliberately, tossing full ones to children, offering packs to women. For a German housewife, to hold an unopened pack of Lucky Strikes was like holding a treasure chest. Stories spread quickly. A woman who carried cigarettes to the market could feed her family for a week. A young widow who received a carton from an American guard used it to buy coal for winter. One soldier recalled, "Propaganda's final collapse. Every cigarette lit by an American soldier was a nail in the coffin of Nazi propaganda." Germans had been told the enemy was poor, undisciplined, collapsing under hardship. Yet here were young men who smoked constantly, wasted tobacco freely, and handed it to children as if it were candy. One German teacher confessed in 1946, "We taught our students that Americans would envy our discipline. Instead, my pupils returned home with cigarettes in their pockets, gifts from soldiers who laughed and sang. The smoke from those gifts was the smoke of our illusions burning. The contrast was unbearable. Propaganda had painted America as weak. Reality smelled of rich tobacco in every ruined street. The price of dignity. But cigarettes were not just survival. They carried psychological weight. Accepting them from an American meant admitting dependence, humiliation, defeat. A widow in Cologne wrote bitterly, "He lit my cigarette for me. I hated him for it. The match felt like pity. I smoked anyway because my children needed the rest of the pack. That smoke tasted like ashes and shame." Others embraced the exchange with pragmatism. One woman said bluntly, "Pride does not feed children. Cigarettes do. I took them, I traded them, and I lived." Dignity bent under the weight of necessity. Smoke blurred the line between gratitude and humiliation. The Americans' blindness. For many GIs, the cigarette economy was invisible. They smoked as habit, unaware that each flick of ash fed a shadow world around them. Some noticed, others did not. Private Joseph Harris recalled, "We'd toss butts on the ground, and the Krauts would pounce like rats. At first we laughed. Later I realized it was desperation, not comedy. We smoked away what they starved for." Other soldiers exploited the system. Some smuggled out cartons, selling them for favors or even companionship. Mealy. Terry police cracked down, but the trade thrived. Cigarettes became bridges and weapons, tools of both mercy and manipulation. Winter of smoke. The winter of 1945–46 was among the harshest in memory. Fuel was scarce, food scarcer. Families huddled in basements, burning furniture to stay warm. Yet in the midst of hunger and frost, the glow of cigarettes lit street corners. Those who held them survived better. They traded for bread, coal, medicine. Those without faded into sickness. The cigarette became not only currency, but also the dividing line between life and death. A Berlin mother recorded, "My son coughed all night. I had no medicine. A neighbor offered pills. If I could pay 3 cigarettes, I had none. He died in March." Stories like hers echoed across cities. Smoke determined fate. Cigarettes and power. The cigarette economy also reshaped power dynamics. Men returned from captivity to find wives and sisters managing households with cigarette trades. Women who once depended on husbands now held authority, negotiating with soldiers, bartering in markets, controlling survival. One historian later wrote, "In 1945, German women ruled with tobacco. They held families together with smoke in their purses. It was a strange reversal. Patriarchy broken not by ideology, but by cigarettes." Beyond survival, yet cigarettes were more than economy. They were psychological relief. Lighting one became ritual, a moment of calm amid chaos. Even those who had never smoked before took it up, not for taste, but for solace. A young secretary admitted, "I hated smoking. But when I lit an American cigarette, I felt alive, if only for a few minutes. It was proof I had survived another day." The smoke curled into the ruined sky, fragile but defiant. Legacy of smoke. By 1948, the Marshall Plan and new currency began to restore order. Cigarettes lost some of their weight as official MO, nay regained power. But the memory lingered. For years, Germans spoke of the cigarette economy, a time when survival was measured in packs and stubs. The first part of our story left us in 1945, with German women frozen at the fences of American barracks, watching in disbelief as GIs lit Lucky Strikes, inhaled casually, then flicked glowing ends into the rubble. For Germans, those stubs were treasure. For Americans, they were nothing but ash. What began as shock quickly became transformation. Cigarettes did not remain symbols for long. They became the backbone of an entire shadow economy, one that fed families, rewrote social rules, and reshaped German life in the early years of occupation. Smoke as currency. In the ruins of Germany, Reichsmarks lost meaning. Inflation and shortages gutted the economy. A loaf of bread could cost 1,000 marks in one town, 100 in another. Coal, soap, medicine, all were scarce, all bartered. But cigarettes were universal. They had measurable value. They were portable, and they carried prestige. An American brand, Lucky Strike, Camel, Chesterfield, meant even more, a guarantee of quality that no ersatz tobacco could match. By late 1945, markets in Munich, Berlin, and Frankfurt buzzed with a new rhythm. Housewives came not with coins, but with cigarettes clutched in hand. A loaf of bread cost 2 cigarettes. A pound of butter, 10. A warm winter coat, a full carton. In one diary, a shopkeeper admitted, "I close the drawer on Reichsmarks. Only cigarettes matter. Each one is like a coin, shining at the end of a matchstick." Women and the trade of survival. For women, cigarettes became lifelines. Many had lost husbands at the front or as prisoners in Siberia. Sons lay in shallow graves across Russia and France. Left with children and bombed apartments, women turned to the one currency that mattered. Some bartered carefully, stretching a pack across a week. Others engaged in darker trades. There were whispered stories of women who sold themselves for cartons, trading dignity for goes, or warmth, shame for calories. One German nurse, interviewed years later, recalled bitterly, "They said we had been liberated, but liberation tasted of tobacco. A carton could decide whether your child ate or starved. We learned to smile at the soldier with a cigarette in his pocket." For many, cigarettes were not pleasure. They were survival dressed in smoke. Children at the gate. Children became scavengers of ash. Every morning, groups gathered at American camp fences, waiting for soldiers to smoke. Some begged outright, "Eine Zigarette bitte." Others darted forward after a flick, grabbing the still glowing stub before it hit the ground. American soldiers found it both amusing and disturbing. Letters home told of kids fighting like cats over cigarette butts. Some GIs, moved by pity, began handing out full sticks, even packs. One soldier wrote to his mother in Ohio, "They stare like I'm holding treasure. I hand them one cigarette and it's like Christmas morning. I thought candy would bring smiles. But tobacco brings tears of relief." For German mothers, the cigarettes children carried home were more valuable than bread. They meant bargaining power. They meant leverage in a broken economy. The black market. Out of this desperation rose the Schwarzer Markt, the black market, where cigarettes ruled supreme. In Berlin's Alexanderplatz, men and women crowded under half-collapsed buildings, trading furiously. 10 cigarettes for a pound of butter, 50 for a pair of shoes. Entire suitcases of American cartons exchanged hands. Some were stolen from supply depots, others handed over by enterprising GIs. Allied authorities struggled to control it, but cigarettes flowed like water, unstoppable. One American officer admitted privately, "We are rebuilding Germany with smoke. Our rations are their currency. It is absurd, and yet it works." Police raids seized crates of cigarettes, but markets reappeared hours later. Cigarettes became not only money, but also identity. Those with them held power. Those without lived on scraps. We'd light up, and the German kids would stand there watching. At first we thought they just wanted candy, but then we saw them fight over cigarette butts. After that, we started giving them whole ones. They'd run back to their mothers like they'd just been given a gold coin. The gesture carried more than tobacco. It carried humiliation, gratitude, and disbelief, all tangled in one. Propaganda shattered. For years, German propaganda had insisted that America was collapsing under its own weight. Newspapers claimed US cities were filled with unemployment, hunger, and crime. Radio voices sneered that American soldiers were weak, poorly supplied, barely able to fight. And yet here they were, smoking constantly, casually wasting what Germans treated as treasure. The sight cracked illusions. If America was starving, why did its soldiers burn wealth like this? A former clerk named Marta described her shock. The Reich taught us Americans were poor, undisciplined, but the cigarette in his hand told me otherwise. He smoked not because he must, but because he could. The smoke was proof of abundance. The beginnings of a black market. Within weeks of surrender, cigarettes flowed into the rubble economy. American PX stores stocked them cheaply for soldiers. Some GIs sold extras, some traded, some simply gave them away. German women carried them into markets, where entire barter systems sprang up. A single cigarette might buy a loaf of bread, a pack might buy a dress, a carton could change a life. In ruined apartments, neighbours whispered of cigarettes more than food. Children who once dreamed of chocolate now dreamed of lucky strikes. One American officer later observed, "We didn't realize it at first, but our cigarettes became Germany's money. The dollar was meaningless to them. Cigarettes bought survival." A scene at the fence. In Darmstadt, 1945, a group of women gather. Ed Daly near the American camp fence. They watched soldiers play cards, smoke, and laugh. Each time one flicked a cigarette away, a scramble began. Women in threadbare coats pushed children forward to grab the prize. One day, an American sergeant noticed. He motioned to the women, then walked to the fence with a full carton. He pressed it through the wire, smiling. The women froze. For a moment, none dared touch it, as if it were a trick. Then one finally reached out, clutching it with trembling hands. The others wept openly. They knew what it meant. Coal for the stove, bread for the children, soap from the black market. That single carton carried more power in that moment than Reichsmarks, than gold, than promises of rebuilding. Cigarettes and dignity, yet cigarettes were more than trade. For some, they restored dignity. German women, stripped of pride by bombings and defeat, felt a strange sense of humanity in being offered a cigarette directly. Soldiers lit them, shared them, joked with them. For a few minutes they were not enemies, but people sharing smoke under the same sky. One woman recalled, "He offered me a cigarette and struck the match for me. I had not been treated with such courtesy in years. It was only smoke, but it felt like recognition, that I still existed." The shadow of shame. But the generosity also carried shame. To depend on discarded stubs or foreign charity was humiliating. Many Germans wept as they smoked, torn between gratitude and bitterness. Another diary entry captured the conflict. "I smoked an American cigarette today. It was sweet, strong, and made me dizzy. I hated myself for loving it. It tasted like defeat, and yet it kept me alive." For women, the choice was brutal. Starve with pride or survive with American tobacco. Most chose survival. Cliffhanger. The cigarette economy emerges. By late 1945, the pattern was clear. Cigarettes were no longer just a luxury. They were the backbone of a new shadow economy. They shaped markets, relationships, even morality.